longer as a decline in industrial output and trade disputes between China and the United States take their toll. Their 2019 forecast basically means that economic growth will lag population growth for the fourth year in a row, stuck well under 3%, and which it slipped to in 2015. In its latest report on the regional economy, the bank also cut its 2018 growth estimate to just 2.3% compared to last October's prediction of 2.7%.
This slower than expected growth comes from both domestic and global factors. Globally, a volatile economic and financial environment, which is also characterized by rising trade tension, but also recovering but uncertain commodity prices are having a negative impact on African economies. Fragility in a handful of African countries is costing us dearly. In terms of growth, over 0.5 percentage point is lost to fragility every year. That is close to 2.6 percentage point over 5 years. This is really significant. The digital revolution can unlock new pathways for inclusive growth and job creation in Africa. In fact, our most recent Africa's polls finds that the benefit of the digital economy are significant for sub-Saharan Africa.
Right then, so that's the big continental picture. Let's drill down to just one state, Kenya. The World Bank has trimmed its forecast for GDP growth in 2019 and 2020 by 10 basis points to 5.7% and 5.9% respectively, compared to the last forecast issued in October. Now, the bank is especially concerned about the hits to output this year due to the delay in the start of the long rain season. Why does that matter? Well, agriculture is home to most jobs in the East African economy. The latest forecasts from the country's meteorological department indicate that there's a high risk of drought. And in fact, in some parts of the country, we're already seeing incidents of famine. At the same time, the bank has also flagged a steady decline in tax to GDP ratios, a growing pile of debt due to suppliers. We're well north of $1 billion on that front, and the ongoing freeze in lending to the private sector as key obstacles to future growth. Peter Chacha is a senior economist at the World Bank and one of the authors of the April edition of the Kenya Economic Update. When we spoke earlier today, he pointed out that their forecasts for 2019 and 2020 assume that lending to the private sector isn't recovering anytime soon.
Given the environment where there's still retention of the cap, the prospect for faster growth in credit is not as positive. Mm-hmm. And that's why we take that into our baseline, that credit will remain subdued. Right.
Private sector consumption, you point out, will boost growth in the future. But looking at the same data sets that you have, on average in the formal sector, real incomes have stagnated and in some cases even fallen for the last 5 years. As you mentioned, private sector credit growth is virtually non-existent. Given those factors, where would the growth come from? Because it doesn't seem like the private sector has the levers in hand at the moment to actually push that growth forward, even as fiscal consolidation, another big assumption on the government side, takes place.
Fiscal consolidation is on good track, and we really want to commend the government for having, it's on its second year of fiscal consolidation. So maybe aware the deficit has fallen from 8.8% in 16-17 to about 6.8 in 17-18. Okay, and it's due to fall to about 6.3 this current FY. This is not little; it's a steep consolidation, and so we really want to commend the government for. In terms of a policy direction that they have assumed for fiscal consolidation. Yeah, and you mentioned one important thing that we also point in the report, that the quality of that consolidation could be further strengthened, particularly ensuring that there is prompt payment of firms that trade with the government.
If private sector is supposed to drive that growth, but they're not getting any of that support, as you mentioned, they're facing a liquidity trap when it comes to spending from government. Incomes at household level, those have stagnated for quite a few years. So that effective purchasing power isn't really there. I mean, the private sector really isn't going to be driving growth for the next couple of years, is it?
Yeah. How do you ease liquidity to the private sector? You ease liquidity to the private sector by ensuring prompt payment of the contracts that have been delayed. Actually, in 2018, the World Bank did an enterprise survey, and in that survey, they find out that about 12% of firms did indicate that they had a contract that had delayed payment from both national but also county governments, right? So you have to find a mechanism to address these pending bills, and that will release liquidity to the private sector, and they can go forward and start spending again. They can start investing. They can start hiring workers.
So essentially,
that's one.
It's a sort of fiscal stimulus pack.
Exactly.
Right.
A second policy solution would be, we keep on saying this, and there's need to continue reinforcing revenue mobilization. Okay. As it is, we know that Kenya's revenue mobilization, maybe 5 years ago, was about 19% of GDP, and it has fallen to about 15.4 in the last FY, 15.4% of GDP. This indicates that if you had it correctly, how did you lose it to allow revenue to drop to about 15.4? So this is
and that's the exemption creep argument that you raise in the report, right?
Yeah, so in the report we do mention that rationalizing exemptions, ensuring that they're properly targeted, maybe at supporting the critical sector like the Big Four, but ensuring that they do not erode the tax base.
My conversation there with Peter Chacha from the World Bank. Now, Egypt has issued Eurobonds worth $2.3 billion on the London stock market this week. Those bonds have 6 and 12-year maturity periods. They're said to be the last issuance for the 2019 fiscal year, which comes to close in June. The uptake, as CGTN's Yasser Kimna reports, is pretty impressive.
The Eurobonds were divided into 1.25 billion 12-year Eurobonds and 750 million 6-year Eurobonds, carrying yields of 4.75% and 6.375% respectively. It was oversubscribed 4 times by 450 investors.
Egypt prefers the international debt because the interest rates and cost is lower than local debt. The money will go into developmental and infrastructure projects. It's been oversubscribed, reflecting the strength of the economy and the positive outlook of the financial institutions such as Fitch and Standard.
The government says this is the last issuance for the current fiscal year. The latest were $4 billion US-dominated Eurobonds last February.
There might be some future pressure on the budget from these debts, but what is apparent is that Egypt has what it calls sustainable debt, which means that the economic growth exceeds debt growth. According to the IMF, the debt is falling to 90% of the GDP and will reach 85% next year, and by 2022 it will go down to 75% or 76% of the GDP.
In the next fiscal year, which begins in July, the government is planning to re-enter the international market again, this time turning to Asia, where it will issue Panda and Samurai bonds from China and Japan. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
S&P Global Ratings expects South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, to continue with its policy reforms after the May 8th election. The stock market index has in the past highlighted slow growth and rising government debt as key risks to the country's credit rating. CGTN's Angela Coppola caught up with the delegates at the annual S&P Global Ratings Agency conference in South Africa.
Economists, observers and ratings agencies understand the structural constraints facing the South African government. They are looking for moves to deal with these issues, which will lead to real economic growth.
We would want to see a much faster pace of economic growth, so economic growth at much higher levels, economic growth which is much higher than population growth, which provides positive per capita, and that also trickles down to perhaps fiscal consolidation as the government is able to collect more tax revenues with better economic growth. Also, conversely, we also see that there could be further downside risks if the economy continues to underperform and posing pressure on public finances.
While the effect of Ramaphosa's administration is being analysed, the national elections are on the horizon, and the lack of data and expertise in polling and forecasting is muddying the waters. Forecasts put the ANC at the high end of 50%, the DA at the low to mid-range of 20%, and the EFF at 11%. The incumbents are concerned because there are several new parties vying for votes.
And there's a lot of tension in parties. They are tearing themselves apart because their constituencies are moving away from each other. And particularly the ANC is trying to hold on to a constituency that has increasingly diverse or even opposing views, whether those are class or cultural views. And we need new parties. We need a renovation because ultimately our politics works when the parties represent the real divisions and interests of the people.
While the election outcomes will only be known in May, economists are watching business confidence indices to see what the business community is happy or anxious about pre- and post-elections.
And it can be very much driven by political events, but for it to be sustainable at whatever level, it depends on, at the end of the day, what happens to demand in the economy. So if we don't have demand picking up, even if you have a, quote, good outcome in the election, business is happy with that, you may have a temporary bounce in business confidence, but if you don't have a demand improvement with that, we don't think that confidence improvement will be sustained.
Everyone's waiting with bated breath to see what those election outcomes are going to be. But the bottom line is, if there isn't economic growth, those voters are going to turn away from the winning party come 2022. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right then, company news. You remember that carbon tax business I started the bulletin with? Let's go back to that. South Africa's new carbon tax apparently could cost Anglo American Platinum up to $21 million a year from 2021. And that will just be adding to the pressure on an industry that's already struggling with much higher energy and labour costs. South Africa's parliament in February approved a long-delayed carbon tax bill as part of plans to reduce harmful emissions in Africa's most industrialised and polluting country. Elsewhere, Nigeria plans to set up an aircraft leasing company to help domestic and regional carriers obtain new planes. It's seeking private partners for that venture. While most airlines want to expand their fleets, the high financing costs and currency risks have hampered their growth. It's actually limited their ability to get planes. The government says that the new firm would initially lease aircraft from international leasers and then sublease them on to domestic operators. Speaking of planes, the European plane maker Airbus says it sees no legal basis for the United States' move to impose trade sanctions on its aircraft. Those remarks came after Washington proposed a list of EU products to impose tariffs on as retaliation for European aircraft subsidies. Now, Airbus added that the US talk of $11 billion worth of damage from EU subsidies to Airbus was, in their view, pretty excessive. And finally, Pinterest has set a price range of $15 to $17 per share for its IPO. It's putting about 75 million shares on offer. That values it below the $12 billion at which the online image search company sourced its last fundraising in 2017. At the upper end of its target range, a company would have a market valuation of about $11.3 billion, and it could raise $1.3 billion in net proceeds, taking into account restricted stock units and options. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how erratic power supply is taking its toll on enterprises in Ghana. And Kenya and South Africa commit to increased bilateral ties as far as trade is concerned. All that and more is in the pipeline.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector. Problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the Bulletin. Erratic power supply is taking its toll on some enterprises in Ghana. The West African oil, gold and cocoa producer has attributed the situation to the shutdown of a gas processing plant in the western end of the country. Authorities say efforts are being made to fix the problem. With the latest, here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai.
A slow day for Isaac Entry. He owns this printing press in Accra and has to deliver some documents to his customers. But his machines are not running due to a power outage.
We have timelines, we have deadlines to meet. So this power outage is not really helping. Sometimes you have to spend extra on fuel, to get the generators powered to finish up the work. And you end up using all your profits.
The power outage in parts of Ghana, including the capital Accra, is affecting many businesses.
Business owners at this printing press hub are without power throughout the working day. They say they can't afford alternative power supply, such as a generator, and want the situation addressed as soon as possible.
The government says the situation is a result of a shutdown of a faulty gas processing plant in the western region, which supplies fuel to the hydro plants in the country. Engineers are now on site fixing the plant. Ghana's Power Distribution Services team says there's nothing more it can do.
We are not doing generation, and so if upstream they have a problem with fuel in terms of the gas being shut down, it's a matter of they rectifying or completing the job, and then they getting the fuel and then giving us the power to distribute. And that's why we continue to apologize for what has happened, because we don't have control.
However, the country had already been experiencing erratic power supply for close to 3 months now. There are still concerns among Ghanaians about whether the country is not generating enough power from its hydro and thermal plants, as happened 3 years ago, leading to a power crisis. But some energy experts think it's actually due to localized issues, including faulty power transmitters and damage to electricity equipment during storms.
Some of the problems we have in now are not because we don't have generation. The one that comes on and goes off, and sometimes you see the power surging, it is not a generation problem. These are localized problems that we need to be able to address so that we have stable power.
Isaac Entry agrees the country needs a more stable electricity supply. His printing business can only thrive on uninterrupted power. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
The third Kenya Trade Investment Summit recently wrapped up in Johannesburg, South Africa, with a commitment to further bilateral investments between South Africa and the East African nation. This year, talks focused on the modalities of progressing talks in the area of movement of persons, goods and services between the two sides. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu was there.
Trade between South Africa and Kenya amounted to over $680 million in 2017. However, it's still skewed towards South Africa, with exports at almost $560 million.
We are working very hard to close on that gap. We are closing on ICT because we are pioneers in fintech. M-Pesa is world renowned. So we, as a country, are looking to work with our brothers and sisters in South Africa so that they can leverage the technologies that we have built.
Kenya wants to grow its 25-year relationship with South Africa, but says there's still too many barriers. Only some of South Africa's visa restrictions were lifted in 2018. Kenyans can now access long-term visas for business, which has provided some relief and opportunity.
Recently, the intergovernmental talks have really assisted the export industry. There is a lot of negotiation across how they can be able to grow the market in Africa. Before, it was not an easier thing to come to South Africa. And if you had a chance to come to South Africa, it was on a short time. And so that means you could not be able even to visit your clients, you could not be able to visit more business opportunities, you could not be able to attend to other market development aspects.
South Africa's exports may be limited somewhat as Kenya seeks to ban all used car imports. The country's Ministry for Trade and Industry has proposed a ban on all second-hand cars and spare parts from South Africa and other countries, especially where the manufacturer has a presence.
Of course, at the moment you have mainly importation of used vehicles in Kenya. So do other countries. Tanzania, even West Africa, they have this phenomenon of used car importation. And a lot of people say it's about affordability. It gives you a cheap car. No, it doesn't. It gives you actually unsafe vehicles that are not designed for a hot climate. They come often from Japan, or they come from the US. South Africa, for example, has zero importation of used cars. 600,000 cars get produced here every year, and zero used cars get imported.
South Africa and Kenya still have a long way to go before the trade playing field is leveled out. But work is being done. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then let's move back into East Africa. The Nairobi Securities Exchange has admitted the property development company MySpace Properties into its incubation and acceleration program dubbed Ibuka. That's basically Emerge in Swahili. Now, the program is aimed at growing visibility and enhancing brand recognition of the hosted firms. The company has also basically introduced a listing requirements ahead of going public. So then, what exactly does this entail for the firm? Let's find out. Wanda Thuranira is the CEO of MySpace Properties. He's with me in studio right now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. So, what's the rationale for joining this program for you, for the company?
Okay. Basically, for the company, we want to grow. We started from the bedroom to the living room, and finally to the office, and now final completely to the public. We want to share this cake. We want to make a big cake which we can all share.
But a lot of entrepreneurs in your space, at least in the last couple of years, the ones I speak to, are like, yeah, well, going public, dealing with all the paperwork, it's a bit of a nightmare. But you want to go public. Why?
No, actually, we have been back and forth on this for the last 3 years, since we felt we were not ready, because we were based in Mombasa. Then after like 10 years of staying in Mombasa, we decided to grow and expand our business to Nairobi. And now we are ready even to go further, go to the public, now that we're in Nairobi, which is a big city. We want to serve the whole country, we want to serve East Africa and Africa in general. Yeah.
So give me a sense of what the business is like, at least as far as the numbers are concerned. What are your revenues? What's your reach? What's your revenue composition like?
Okay. Wow. You want to know about my revenue?
Well, revenue composition would be nice, since you are going to go public at some point.
Yes, of course we are going public. Our revenue is not bad. I mean, we've been in business in Kenya for the last 10 years. Before that, we used to be based in the USA. And now, of course, we are looking into raising around $1 billion. That's to put it into the tenant purchase scheme, whereby we'll be able to purchase houses and give to tenants to own their houses. So basically, we are looking into raising $1 billion by the end of the day.
And do you have any timelines for that listing?
At least by end of next year, we should be there, inshallah.
And is all of that going to be raised through equity, or is part of that $1 billion going to come in through debt? I mean, what's your rationale there?
I mean, at the moment, we are open for the all options, equity, debt. We are open people investing in the company, and basically sharing into it, since it's guaranteed income. Once you get the rental income every month, I mean, it's 12% return. That's pretty good income for anybody wanting to get returns.
Right. Let me just pedal back to the listing question, because as far as capital is concerned, there's plenty of money that's sloshing about from the private equity guys. Plenty of funds here that raise at least $100 million closes plus every other year. So why not talk to them?
Basically, this is the beginning. You see now with us listing in the stock market, now, of course, our corporate governance will be on point, since, I mean, we'll have a lot of checks from CMA, from NSE and other authorities.
And then the rest of us will come in and complain if your quarterly numbers don't make sense.
Exactly. So now, I mean, we have to be very mature, not like before. I mean, we were doing our own things. I mean, like any other entrepreneur, you do your own accounting, your own way. But now, I mean, we have to do it in a standard way, in a certain way. We have to do it right. I mean, no rooms for mistake. In the last 10 years, in the last 15 years in business, we have done many mistakes. But now, I mean, we are ready to be scrutinized. We are ready to do things right, to put corporate governance on point. We are having a board and all that good stuff. Yes.
So just to be clear, have you spoken to any PE funds at this point, or is that perhaps going to come later?
They'll come later, but we are speaking to some of them. Yes, and the interest is very high. Thank God for that.
All right, one last question for you. So as I understand it, your business covers everything from property development onto management and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, I'm just looking at the headline numbers here, cement production and consumption falling from 2016. Now, one strand of thought is that might be linked to the starvation of credit that took place in that year. But at the same time, this is a country that has an enormous housing deficit. We bring 50,000 units to the market, but actual demand is north of 240,000 a year. Given that that deficit, why is it that we're not building as many houses? What's the problem?
Okay, actually, Rama, the main problem in the housing sector is affordability of credit, which boils down to mortgages. We have less than 30,000 mortgages in Kenya, which means is like of population of 40 million, that's like 0.1%. Basically, the penetration in mortgages is not there. Every Kenyan, by the end of the day, wants to own a home. But when it comes to financing, since it's a high capital intensive, I mean, to get a house, you need 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. It's hardly you can save that and put it together. It will take you a long time. So that's why somebody needs mortgage, tenant purchase schemes, and kind of innovative ideas we are coming up with to make sure Kenyans are able to own houses. Right. And in the last since 2016, of course, the real estate market has taken a lot of hit. And I mean, with the long electioneering period, the starvation of credit, as you said, I mean, it's been tough period, especially even now, developers don't talk loudly as they were talking before. Right now, they are very quiet. But you know, market is about going up and down. Sometimes when it goes down, it wins out the unserious people in this industry. So basically, only the strong will survive, and we want to be the strong company which will survive this.
All right, Mwende Thuranira, MySpace Properties. Thank you very much for coming.
Appreciate
it.
Yes.
All right then, so away from the business of real estate over in Kenya, let's focus on something a little different. A Chinese firm has set up a $45 million plastic waste recycling company in Kenya. It's called Wiko Recycling Company. It's set to recycle anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 tons of PET bottles every month in its two plants, one in Nairobi and one in the port city of Mombasa. Now, the company has signed a partnership with the Kenya PET Recycling Company, PETCO, which is the industry body with a mandate of regulating the management of post-consumer PET packaging in the country. Now, these firms will collect and recycle plastic bottles into pellets, which are later converted into fibers or garments. Plastic waste is a global challenge, with 8 million tons of plastics finding their way into the oceans every year.
The partnership seeks to promote the collection and recycling of 2,000 tons of post-consumer packaging, or an estimated 84 million PET bottles. The PETCO model has been tried and tested in South Africa, with collection and recycling of 5.9 million plastic bottles daily. The company has also provided the recycling sector with around 64,000 jobs since inception.
For further improvements, we have invested $6 million in our Mombasa branch, and we will import 10 other tons of manufacturing lines of renewable pallets. With this new equipment, we will be able to dispose 3,000 tons of wasted plastic produce per month. President Uhuru Kenyatta has launched his Big Four agenda plans, including manufacturing, affordable housing, food security, and universal health care. We will follow the guidelines of this agenda and make an effort to become the biggest company of renewable energy in Kenya and in East Africa. We will commit ourselves to manufacturing, job creation, and environmental protection.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. The UK's Prime Minister has been in Berlin and in France as she seeks support for an extension of the Brexit deadline. And the freight train service linking the Chinese cities with Europe breathes new life into an ancient Silk Road.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Let's start in Algeria. Parliament has confirmed Abdelkader Ben Salah as the interim president of the North African oil producer. The country will hold new elections within 90 days. The decision to name Ben Salah as interim president follows the Constitutional Council's decision last week to declare the presidency vacant on account of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's failing health. Protesters, though, have taken to the streets. They're deeply opposed to this decision. The UN, in the meantime, is warning warring factions in Libya against targeting civilians. The UN's Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, has also said that fighters targeting unarmed civilians risk being charged with war crimes. The death toll from the fighting has risen to 51, even as the UN calls for a humanitarian truce. A group of prominent opposition leaders in Sudan have joined protesters for the first time in 3 months for a sit-in outside the Army Command headquarters in the capital, Khartoum. The demonstrators demanding that the current government step down. The latest unrest has left at least 6 people dead. That's according to the country's interior minister. The African Union has expressed concern over growing insecurity in the country, and it has called for restraint. And finally, the United Nations says much-needed aid is finally reaching those displaced in the aftermath of Cyclone Idai. Close to 800,000 people have received food assistance, with over 200,000 homes damaged or destroyed. In the meantime, nearly 60% of the population in affected areas have been vaccinated against cholera. Hundreds of suspected cases are also receiving treatment. That's a run through your headlines. Right then, let's move on to the latest on Brexit. The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, is holding last-minute Brexit talks with the French President Emmanuel Macron, with the UK due to leave the EU by the end of the week. Mrs May is expected to urge the French President to back her request to delay Brexit again, this time until the 30th of June. Now, the Prime Minister earlier met with the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, in Berlin to seek a last-gasp bid to keep her country from crashing out of the EU on Friday without a deal. May says she fears Brexit might never happen as she battles to get a divorce deal ratified by a divided parliament. While many, including the Prime Minister herself, would much prefer that the UK goes before the European Parliament elections are held at the end of next month, there appears to be increasing focus on a longer delay of up to a year, not in the least to defuse the continuing threat of a no-deal Brexit and all the economic disruption that would bring to the table. At the same time, EU ministers have signalled their openness to grant the UK a second extension, but there's always a caveat to these things, as only if the British Prime Minister is willing to come up with a crystal clear plan on how to ratify a long-stalled divorce agreement. Ministers from the 27 remaining countries met in Luxembourg to lay the groundwork for Wednesday's meeting in Brussels, where they're set to decide whether to grant Theresa May a Brexit extension. Now, without that extension offer from the EU, the UK will crash out of the EU without a deal on Friday.
Wir erwarten endlich substanzielle Schritte.
We are finally waiting for a substantive step in the right direction. Up to now, nothing has changed. We are of course thinking about an appropriate extension of the deadline and also about a longer extension. They must, however, come with very strict conditions.
Strenge Kriterien gebunden.
We want to understand what the UK need this extension for and what is the political surroundings around Theresa May to have this extension. And then comes the question of the conditions of what role want the UK to play during this extension time. How does it want to decide and on what type of decisions it wants to play a role.
Let's weigh in on developments on Brexit. Stefan de Vries is live in Paris tonight. He joins us live from that very city. So then, Stefan, what did Theresa May get out of a meeting with the French president today?
Well, not much yet. They are still having dinner, but it is clear that Theresa May is more or less begging Emmanuel Macron to agree to a longer extension. Theresa May would like to see the negotiations delayed until the 30th of June. But President Emmanuel Macron is not really motivated to give her that delay. There are now sources talking about another extension until the end of this year. But unless, of course, the United Kingdom decides to organize European elections, which will take place on the 23rd and the 26th of May here in Europe. But if they don't, then the UK will crash out of the European Union on the 1st of June. So it's still not clear what Theresa May exactly wants, because the European leaders just want to have the answer to one simple question: what do you propose? And really it's now up to Britain, to the United Kingdom, to come up with any solutions, because the European leaders are getting very tired and even more or less irritated by the way the UK is now handling the Brexit process.
Indeed, so there is clear exasperation across Europe, as you just mentioned, at the lack of progress in the UK. Legislators have said what they don't want, but they're not saying what they do want. Given that, what would be the case for the EU to give the UK an even longer extension?
Well, there are now plans to give them an extension, maybe till the end of the year, but that's not clear either. Tomorrow there will be a summit in Brussels where the leaders will discuss and decide what to do with the UK. They want to give the UK the time to come up with a decent proposal, and actually what they really want is that the withdrawal agreement will be ratified by the United Kingdom. Theresa May has not managed to get the ratification of the withdrawal agreement so far. It doesn't seem very likely that it will be ratified by the UK, but the EU is now ready to give as much time as Theresa May needs to get this withdrawal agreement through Parliament, although it will come with very strict conditions. But that is not the ideal solution, but actually nobody in Europe would like to see the UK crash out of the EU next Friday without a deal. So that's what they want to prevent at any cost.
Indeed. So far the EU27 have made it clear they're not interested, they're not going to reopen talks at all on the withdrawal agreement. But I know this is a bit of a left field question, but is there any chance at all that may change because of this deadlock and how it's just dragging on?
No, it's not very likely that the EU would agree to change the withdrawal agreement. It has been negotiated for over 2 years. It's about 580 pages, agreed upon by the British government. So they already said, the 27 EU leaders, in their concept conclusions of tomorrow, they have already stated that they do not want to reopen the withdrawal agreement. So it's either this or nothing. Take it or leave it. So Theresa May is really with her back against the wall, and she will have to come up with something very serious tomorrow in Brussels if she wants to convince the other 27 European leaders.
Indeed, let's see how all of this does play out. Stefan de Vries in Paris, thank you very much. Now, the British government is still trying to avoid to crash out of the EU without a deal, hurting businesses and the economy as a whole. But fishermen over there prefer a no-deal Brexit, apparently, because it's the only way, they say, to prevent boats from other EU countries from fishing in the UK's territorial waters. As Kitty Logan reporting from Hastings.
The fishing boats sail ashore with the morning tide, seagulls hovering over their catch. It's a long, exhausting night for these small boat crews, and the sight of the Hastings shoreline is a welcome one. But despite the hard graft, fishermen here struggle to make a living. They blame the limitations of the EU's common fisheries policy, which is designed to protect fish stocks. But Paul Joy, head of the local fishing society, believes the EU is bad for British fishing. He claims these traditional fishermen know how to fish responsibly.
Our family's fished here for 1,000 years and fished sustainably, and we have brilliant fish stocks up until we went into Europe. Then it was plundered to extinction nearly. It's come back, but the problem is, even though fish stocks have come back, we still haven't the right to catch fish in our own waters. We only catch a minute proportion of the fish we're allowed, well, we should be catching.
The EU determines how much these fishermen can bring in each day. They say the quotas aren't enough, and they've been getting smaller each year. Fishermen are even forced to throw away fish if they catch too much, or risk a fine. The restrictions have hit these small crews hard, which is why they're backing Brexit.
Fishing communities like this one believe they will benefit from Britain exiting the EU. They're frustrated by those constraints imposed from Europe, and they think they will be better off once those ties are severed.
Fishermen also say the strict limitations on where these boats can operate favour their French rivals.
We can't fish into 12 miles of the French shore, they can fish into 6 miles of us. Is that fair? It's not, and it's destroyed the fishing industry in this country. We need the opportunity, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to come back and take control of the British waters.
Now fishermen want a no-deal Brexit. They say it's the only way to prevent boats from other EU countries fishing in their territorial waters.
If we get our waters back, it'll make a big difference, especially in little communities like this. Should see fishing improve dramatically.
Many believe Britain crashing out of the EU without a deal will hurt businesses. The government is desperately trying to avoid that. But fishermen here believe it will open up new horizons. And they hope it could allow this small fishing fleet to grow again. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Hastings.
The freight train service linking cities in China with cities in Europe is breathing life into an ancient Silk Road. Boosted by the Belt and Road projects, the international train service has been expanding rather rapidly in the last 8 years. CGTN's Meng Qingsheng has the details.
In southwest China's Chengdu, television manufacturer Skyworth delivers its first batch of products on board the China-Europe Railway Express. The freight train heading for Lodz in Poland carries 41 cabinets loaded with TV displays, motherboards and other spare parts.
The China-Europe Railway Express helps connect the manufacturing and distribution ends of our products. We hope to improve supply chains and production strategies and integrate into the European market. And we are planning to bring an automated production line to the continent and better supply markets there.
The railway network connects 59 cities in China with 15 European countries. Chengdu is one of the busiest. In 2018, the city dispatched over 1,500 freight trains to Europe, a quarter of the country's total.
Departing from here, it takes roughly 2 weeks for cargo trains to travel the 10,000 kilometer distance between China and Europe. It's about 1 month faster than traveling by sea, while costing relatively the same. Since it was launched in 2013, this logistical solution has helped open up China's hinterland and contribute to a boom in bilateral trade relations.
Official statistics show two-way trade between China and the EU hit a record high of over $680 billion in 2018, up more than 10% year-on-year. European enterprises are embracing the Chinese market by expanding their businesses.
In many cases, if it goes about food production, it's ecological, so we use less artificial, less fertilizers than our Western neighbors. That's our products are innovative. Of my opinion, China is already experiencing very good trade with Europe, but we would like to have it both ways.
Hailing its maiden freight train transport, Skyworth plans to export 1.5 million TV sets this way to Europe in 2019. It sees a total market potential of 8 million across the continent.
We need to focus on the content of our service, as well as ways to meet the European standards. We hope to include more services into our smart TV designs in Europe.
To that end, the company has decided to set up supply chain centers in countries like Poland and Germany. While these trains carrying its TV products take the company a step closer to fulfilling its global strategy. Meng Qingsheng, CGTN, Chengdu, Sichuan Province.
The social media giant Facebook picked Singapore recently for its regional headquarters and its first ever data center in Asia. The British tech firm Dyson also is moving its corporate headquarters into Singapore. So what exactly makes Singapore such a good fit for global businesses and startups alike? CGTN's Mirilu finds out.
Although small in size, Singapore is a giant when it comes to attracting scores of global businesses looking to ride the wave of Asian growth. Data shows that 46% of global MNCs or multinational corporations have chosen the city-state to be their regional headquarters in Asia.
Singapore is a good expatriate location, good schools and safe, secure and well-connected and so on. Singapore also offers a decent sort of trade-off in terms of availability and cost and productivity.
Take, for example, British home appliance giant Dyson, which is relocating its corporate headquarters from the UK to Singapore. While some attribute the move to Brexit, most experts believe Singapore was chosen for its low corporate tax rate and its strategic position in Southeast Asia. Western companies have long used Singapore to tap into the Asian market. Recently, more Chinese companies are using Singapore as a launchpad to go global. Chinese tech startup Yitu is a pioneer in artificial intelligence. The company has picked Singapore as the location for its first R&D center outside of China.
It is a commerce hub, economic hub, and also a technology hub. So by setting our overseas headquarters in Singapore, it gives us very good reference cases for other regions in Southeast Asia and beyond. We have benefited greatly from the Economic Development Board of Singapore, which has been a great helping hand in helping us set foot in Singapore and also introducing us to local partners.
How do we make Singapore the digital hub in Asia?
EDB's help doesn't stop there. It also provides attractive tax incentives to companies moving to Singapore. A concessionary tax rate of 15% is offered to companies that have regional headquarters in Singapore. Those awarded the international HQ status can be eligible for further tax rebates. Singapore's multiple free trade agreements with ASEAN, China, EU, and the US also add to its attractiveness. These agreements make trading across borders cheaper and easier. But all great successes come with their own set of challenges. One big challenge for Singapore is the steady availability of talent.
R&D needs a lot of scientific manpower, right? And I think Singapore is trying to develop that scientific manpower. Singapore is also kind of very pragmatic, government is very pragmatic, so they will cover shortfall in manpower with inward immigration, so they might allow scientists to kind of come here and work here and so on.
A strong business ecosystem and the government's continued push for innovation work in Singapore's favor. But some analysts warn that rising costs and a shortage of skilled manpower could hurt the Lion City's position as the preferred destination in Asia. Mirulu, CGTN, Singapore.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So renewed fighting in Libya is really the factors driving Brent crude higher and higher. It actually did hit 71.34 earlier today, but we haven't seen prices at those levels since November last year. At this point in time, though, oil output and exports in Libya not yet affected by the fighting, but of course at about 1.1 million barrels a day. It's about 1% of global output, so definitely worth keeping a lookout for any changes in the North African state. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why Sun City is reckoning it'll bounce back this year after writing down the value of some of its assets.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Sun International expects its flagship resort, Sun City, to bounce back this year following a relatively weak 2018. The iconic hotel and casino resort has been underperforming in recent years, and that prompted the group to actually write down the value of its assets for the first time in 40 years. Here's CGTN's Simrita Naidu with the details.
The famous Sun City Hotels and Casino Resort was the brainchild of Saul Kerzner. He opened the resort in 1979 in what was then a homeland under apartheid. For Kerzner, it was perfect. He opened the first casino in Bopo, Botswana homeland, where gambling was legal, It was illegal in South Africa. Over the years, Sun City has grown into a massive asset for the Sun International Group, but the weak economy is taking away some of its shine.
I think the main reason, is a bit of a downturn in business, difficult environment. We spent a lot of money on Sun City a few years ago, and Sun City is in pretty good state.
Severe storms flooded the resort late last year. However, the extra spend and a 3% decline in income forced auditors to lower the value of Sun City for the first time.
We spent over $1 billion. The value of Sun City is quite high, so the auditors look at it and say, is this an indication of impairment? And we impaired the asset carrying value. The asset itself is still in very good state, and for customers is really a great product.
The mess up with visa regulations, the recent hike in VAT and cash-strained consumers not only affected Sun City, but gaming revenue in other parts of South Africa. However, Sun International still reported a 7% rise in revenue in 2018.
Sun International Group expects to return to a full profit in 2019. It may still be a bit of a stretch as the consumer market in South Africa in particular remains constrained.
It was really through being efficient, really working hard at what we do and making sure there's no wasted cost, wasted effort. So that's been the big focus of the past year, and I think given the circumstances, the environment we currently face, that's going to be the continuing theme for the next year or so. These things take time. We're optimistic in the medium term that things will get better. But in the short term, we understand consumers under pressure, businesses under pressure, and people holding back.
Consumers don't have discretionary income to be spending to go on holiday. So this was also one of the reasons why there's been a decline in the demand for accommodation over the course of 2018 and into 2019. So consumers are definitely cutting back, and their ability to travel within the country is limited. But within this environment, consumers got high levels of indebtedness.
Analysts expect South Africa's retail and leisure sector to improve in the second half of the year after the elections. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
A Zambian painter, Victor Sitali, has been moving crowds at the World Art Exhibition in Dubai with his speed on the canvas. What makes his work even more unique is the fact that he cannot hear. Here's CGTN's Jane Keo with that story.
Due to his hearing impairment, Victor Sitali lives in silence. But his hands on the canvas are fast and furious. In just 7 minutes, this Zambian artist is done with his painting. Victor is obviously living the moment of his life, but his journey to the top has not been easy.
He wasn't born deaf, but it's something that came gradual. Something we suspect after a very high fever when he was 2.5, but we discovered by the time he was about 2.5, 3, that's when he was pronounced hard of hearing. As time went on, then he became totally deaf.
As a young boy, his family moved to Dubai, where he was enrolled in an art school for children with special needs.
When we came to Dubai, because of the hardships of the schools for the deaf people, there's a lady called Gushen who discovered him from Dubai Center for Special Needs and encouraged him to join Mawaher.
It was a case of trial and error as his mother explored ways of making Victor a better person.
At the time you discover you are hopeless, and all the days all you think of is crying. How will I handle my child? What will be of my child? What kind of future will my child have? But with this, what he's doing now, luckily we came here also, where he met with this encouragement to his talent, which I would say was discovered by try and error. We are now happy. But otherwise, it was a tearful time. Whenever you see the other siblings, or whenever you look at him, all you do is to cry, and you don't know what to do. You don't know what kind of future.
A graphic design graduate, Victor has benefited with mentorship from renowned artist Trevor Waugh, who discovered him during one of the art displays in Dubai. His brilliant display of art
has seen him showcase his works in various countries, including the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom and the Netherlands. The golden sense of Victor Sitali's silence is evidenced by the creative works that he delivers as his audience waits. Jane Kale, CGTN.
And finally, a quick run through the currencies for you. The rand is having quite the day. It actually hit a 6-week high. 14.01 was the relevant number in today's session. It did ease back a fair bit in the session, though, 14.07 by 17.13 or so GMT earlier today. But even at those levels, it's up almost 2% against the dollar so far this year. The cedi, on the other hand, not having a good year. The $3 billion bond sale did help quite a bit, but it's sort of settled around the 5.2 range. It lost ground to the dollar today, down by about 0.7%. At those levels, it's about 5% weaker so far in the year. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour or so. Several ways of getting your thoughts back